with the Clippers potentially playing a very appropriate potential last game at Crypto.com Arena. Did Paul George play in that game? I don't remember ever seeing him really.
Paul George played, just playoff P didn't get off the bus. I think that's what happened. Him and James Harden followed up just an incredible, game 4 to even the series up. Closer James Harden, which if folks remember, like James Harden obviously has a horrible playoff reputation, but he's had great playoff games interspersed into a bunch of series across the years. It's just that when it was at a critical juncture, whenever it matters the most, whenever the rubber hits the road, whenever the shit hits the fan, whenever, any of the cliche you want to use, he's
rock in a hard place.
Yeah, he's just tended to stink up the joint, and tonight has been no different.
There's also a thing with him where he's almost never more certain to have a bad game than after he's had a great game.
Oh, yeah.
We were due for it. And this was a real stinker. I'll do credit to the Mavs, who I thought genuinely just timed him out a lot better. They kept him from getting in rhythm on his threes. They kept him off of the free throw line. You saw Derrick Jones Jr. block him on a step back. You saw PJ Washington hound him from behind and swat one of those floaters just right out of midair. So Dallas was doing a lot to bother him. But I wouldn't say Harden was particularly inclined to work around them or force the issue or do really anything adaptive at all in this game other than I'm going to pass out and chill. And Paul George also, I'm going to pass out and chill. And that leads to a lot of Amir Coffey in weird spots, a lot of Russell Westbrook shooting bait corner threes. And for some reason, a team that was just like getting easy money from Ivica Zubac in the first half of this game decided, as many teams do with their centers for some reason, we're just going to stop passing him the ball. Do either of you understand why that's happening?
I don't think it's an actual offensive philosophy that anybody actually believes in. We know damn well James Harden, Russell Westbrook, and Paul George don't believe in offense should run through Ivica Zubac, and I don't think Ty Lue does either. I think it's kind of a tactic that they go to early on in order to elicit a response from Dallas to open up their other guys who they inevitably want to have the ball anyway, right? I'm not surprised by the fact that they didn't want to, do Zubac post-ups for the rest of the night. What does kind of surprise me is just the general lethargy and just malaise of starting the offense with like 12 seconds left every single possession and walking it up, and just the lack of urgency on this team is just it's disheartening to see. And their season is clearly on the line, on the brink, and they just seem to be going through the motions, which is just very disappointing.
And to contrast that, Justin, I don't think I've ever seen Luka play this fast. He was booking it down court. Even when the Mavs have kind of revved up in the regular season, it's usually him hitting ahead and passing it out to guys. He was busting ass in transition, which I think is a credit to how well the Clippers have played defensively at times in the half court in this series. But the energy discrepancy between them could not have been more stark.
Running in transition, busting his ass on defense in spots, at the very least, enough to, at the very least, show his team that he was out there doing that. I don't think he and Kyrie hit a three until late in the third quarter. For me, this was just like a clear sign of what those two are able to do together just from a playmaking standpoint. A lot is just kind of focused on the scoring, and obviously so, but just the way they're able to activate all those guys around them, I think is just a pretty sharp contrast to what Harden and Paul George were not doing for some of those other guys you're mentioning. It does help when you have vertical threats like a Lively and Gafford, because there was a stretch there where they were really putting it on Zubac, and it felt like that's when they decided to go away from Zubac. But they're just able to orchestrate and get things moving when things aren't necessarily going well for themselves shooting the ball.
And to do that on a night where Luka's nursing a bum knee, he was reportedly sick going into this game. And for that guy to have as much energy as he did relative to your Paul Georges and your James Hardens, I think is just kind of indefensible. Like, as we've been told many times, these are pivotal game fives, guys. These are very pivotal. You got to show up and pivot. If you're not going to pivot, what are you even doing here?
Yeah, and I think some of the Clippers' limitations as an offense are are shown here, right? Look, they were more discombobulated when Kawhi was playing because he's clearly hampered by the knee problems. But, when he's not right, you got to think about who even is a shooter on this team. Paul George can make an open three. Obviously, Norm Powell is a willing and accurate shooter. I think Amir Coffey has his moments, but Harden doesn't like to take spot up threes, so he doesn't even count as a floor spacer. Of course, there's Westbrook, there's Zub, there's Plum Dog, there's PJ. They don't have a very dynamic offense to begin with. And I think Jake hit over the years, man, if anything, he's become a pretty creative defensive coach. And when it's all right, we got the gist of what you guys were trying to do against us in game 4. We're going to come back with a pretty solid game plan to shut that water off. And they went about doing that. And, I mean, goddamn, last night at the crypt ever for the Los Angeles Clippers. Pour one out, y'all.
I mean, it may not be.
Well, they were definitely comatose in this one.
They were comatose.
If you want to bury them, you might as well.
I can't blame you, but everything always looks incredibly dark after a playoff loss. And as we've seen in this series, can change very, very quickly. But as far as all those dynamics and how the stars in the team are activating the players around them, that's one very specific area in which I just wish Paul George had played better. Every time he would drive into traffic, one of two things would happen. He would get swallowed alive by all of these rotating Mavericks defenders and all of that length inside. He was throwing up awful shots, just barely even hitting rim or sometimes missing it entirely over Gafford and Washington and Derek Jones. Or he was trying to spray out and threw just horrendous passes, completely off target. Nowhere even near Terrence Mann as he's trying to kick out, to the point that even if Mann does get a hand on the ball, the possession is completely derailed.
Yeah, he was just reckless going into the lane, or just didn't seem like he had a clear idea of where he wanted to go with the possession. I almost wonder if this is where the subtle effects of Kawhi not being in there really starts to show, because Harden, yes, he had an awful game, but they really brought him in to orchestrate, to set those other guys up. And it did feel like the type of game where Harden wanted to go into deferential mode and kick it over to these guys, and Paul George didn't pick it up, and Kawhi wasn't there to pick it up. And so who's going to do it? Probably Russell Westbrook, even though he shouldn't, to the point where there was a clip circulating on Twitter, someone right behind the bench from Dallas, they were telling their guys to let this guy shoot as many times as he wanted to. And what do you know? 2 for 11 tonight, over 3 from 3.
Yeah.
As depressing as this outcome was for the Clippers, I think we can rejoice on one thing and one thing only, and we could finally forever bury the Clippers might be a pretty good team and the Clippers might be dangerous and the Clippers. Never, ever doing it again. Thank God it's over. We don't even have to. No, it's not happening, Justin. It's not happening. This team is cooked. I mean, even Paul George, who, we all picked him for All-NBA. He had a nice season. It's just obvious the injuries and the age factor have taken its toll. He's just not one of these upper echelon type of stars anymore. He just can't routinely create space. He can't routinely turn the corner. He can't routinely get to the basket and finish over people. Like you mentioned him driving into traffic, it's just turnover and horrible pass. And he's just not one of those guys anymore at the upper echelons of it. You can't even say, I think the best of Paul George, we used to call him the ideal 2, right? A fantastic 2 in the mold of what Jamal Murray is on Denver, or what Tyrese Maxey is turning himself into in Philadelphia. You can't say that about Paul George anymore. He's not an elite 2. Obviously, he's not a 1. He's still a good player, useful player, effective player, but he can't on a night-to-night put his imprint on the game. And yeah, we can bury the hatchet on quote-unquote contender Clippers for the rest of our lives, with this iteration anyway.